It's funny to go back and watch videos from prominent Brexiteers from back in especially 2016 and 15 in the run up to the referendum, because there was one constant thing on their mind, especially when it came to the EU: accountability. We have, apparently, as they claimed, no accountability when it comes to these, quote, unelected European bureaucrats. We can't decide what we do. We can't get rid of them. How do we hold them accountable? Fast forward all but 4 years later, and we have Dominic Cummings, an advisor to Boris Johnson, who was completely an unelected bureaucrat, who has come in and has started making serious, systematic changes to the way that our government runs and operates. I have to ask the question, Brexiteers and Brexit supporters, why aren't you outraged at this guy? Because here is an unelected bureaucrat, unable to be removed from office. You can't vote him out. You didn't even vote him in, but he's there. And of course, this is what Johnson and his government are seemingly all about. And one of the big problems, simultaneously, it's also good and bad. Johnson has a big majority, so he can't really pass the blame on to anyone else for his failings. Johnson and the Tories can essentially pass any law they want, regardless if every other opposition MP voted against them. They couldn't stop it. So there's that on one side. On the other side, however, because Johnson has such a large majority, Johnson goes completely unchallenged on many of this stuff. In fact, you've got an interesting thing of when Parliament starts to get back into the swing of things after the summer recess, will Johnson start to miss more and more Prime Minister's question times? Which, again, raises more questions of how can you hold the Prime Minister to account when the Prime Minister does not appear at Prime Minister's question times? Why? Because before, he was taking an absolute pasting from Keir Starmer, and that will continue. And of course, this brings us to today's article, which comes from The Guardian, and it's Johnson's method of government: total power with absolutely no responsibility. Michael Gove, who liked to think of himself as the philosopher prince of the Johnson government, recently made a speech which he sought to explain why so many voters have a deep sense of disenfranchisement with the way that they have been governed. Faith in the controversial political parties has been broken by incompetent leaders who lost the trust of the public, with, quote, failures of policy and judgment, generating a crisis of authority that has compounded by cultural condensation and insulation from accountability. The public was entitled to better from the government, of which Mr. Grove is a senior member. Politicians like me must take responsibility for the effect of their actions and the consequences of their announcements. Evidently, Gavin Williamson did not get the memo, or he took the memo on holiday, meaning to read it, but struggled to open the envelope, or he had a last-minute change of mind about reading the memo, or he basically just didn't read it, but did not understand it. From the bungling of the reopening of schools to the failure to deliver adequate remote learning, the Education Secretary has presided over several of the most egregious blunders during the pandemic, culminating the A-level grading debacle that inflicted so much trauma on so many young people. Far from actually taking responsibility for his actions by resigning, he's still drawing a salary of a cabinet minister, and a survival that unites Conservative and Labour MPs in complete astonishment. Boris Johnson must also have missed that Grove speech on restoring nobility to public service. Otherwise, he too would have sacked Mr. Williamson for his ignoble failings. The Gove theory that public faith in politics requires competent and accountable leadership from their own politicians is a decent one. How unfortunate that he is a member of the cabinet that practices the opposite. This is not done so by accident, but by conscious design. With Mr. Johnson's inner circle, it is a private boast that they are tearing up the rule book of government. One of the rules is that they have been shredding most aggressively is the concept of ministerial responsibility. Under previous governments, the many different complications of this idea has been central to how democratic policy is supposed to work. When things go wrong, the minister is accountable to Parliament and must answer to the public for his department's failings. When things go badly wrong, the minister resigns. Ministerial responsibility is at the core of the compact between the government, Parliament and the public. Bowden Modox, the director of the Institute for Government, has it right when he says, unless there are consequences for ministers of the decisions that are their responsibility, the UK's principles of democratic accountability will become meaningless. This government has inverted the doctrine to a point where ministers assign responsibility for misjudgments and failure to anyone but themselves. When searching for somewhere else to throw the blame, their first choice is the civil servants, who make convenient targets because they are not supposed to answer back. And so goes out Sally Colfier, the chief executive of Ofqual, the regulator over the grading fiasco. Following her overboard goes Jonathan Stater, the permanent secretary at the Department of Education, who was sacked in a completely brutal way, even by standards of the current regime. Mr. Williamson, meanwhile, stumbers on toward his next appointment with calamity and the apparent determined to make Chris Grayling feel a bit better about his time in government. That is quite true. I mean, we're reaching a point where we have other ministers that are potentially eclipsing failing Grayling. And Gavin Williamson is generally not that too far off. If there is a second wave, and it is caused by schools, and schools having massive outbreaks of COVID-19 resulting in their closure, then he will have officially eclipsed, failing Grayling, and it will be absolutely... But that's the modern Tory party. So even in a darker part of the forest, there is a manifest effort to manipulate inquiries into the handling of the coronavirus crisis by shifting culpability from the Prime Minister and his lieutenants. Sir Mark Sidwell was effectively fired as a cabinet secretary in June after anonymous briefings to Number 10 friendly media designed to depict him as being the prime responsible for the numerous failings to get a grip on the emergency. Public Health England, which is also to be scrapped before there is any full accountability as to who was responsible for which errors, is also being cast as a scapegoat. The character of government is shaped by the personality of the person at the top. When he was US President, Harry Truman had a sign on his Oval Office desk that was inscribed, "The buck stops here." If Boris Johnson had a sign, it would read, "Not me, Gov." Anyone familiar with his biography knows that he does not feel constrained by conventional norms of behaviour, nor will he willingly surrender responsibility for his bad choices. His career is potholed with scandals, betrayals, and complete catastrophe of trust. Having got to the pinnacle of the greasy pole all at the same time, he has concluded that providing your skin is thick enough and your reserves of shamelessness are deep enough, there is no scandal so enormous or blunder so titanic that it cannot be brazened out. The law of impunity that he wrote for himself is being applied to his cabinet of loyal toadies. Not only does Mr. Williamson continue to draw his cabinet salary, Robert Jellick is still installed in a ministerial limousine, despite having unlawfully approved a £1 billion property development. Mr. Johnson is encouraged in this by the gang of Brexiteers who he imported into Number 10. Taking their lead from Dominic Cummings, they have a hyper-aggressive, never apologise, never concede mindset, in which they can never be wrong. The defining non-resignation that there was the Prime Minister's chief advisor after the exposure of his lockdown-busting excursions to in and around Durham, and contrition-free account of his activities included that eye test defence is a complete side tour to the Bernard Castle, is risibly of his excuses demonstrating complete contempt for any criticism. Oh dear. Mr. Cummings refused to resign, and Mr. Johnson refused to sack him. Despite days of terrible headlines, serious damage to the public's government health messaging, hot public anger, and furious demands from many Tory MPs that he had to be let go. By successfully defying that level of pressure, the pair proved to themselves that no one can stop them tearing up the conventional rules about accountability. Yet there will be consequences for the government's novel doctrine of total power with no responsibility. When ministers start thinking that they will never be held accountable for their actions, they are too much or more likely to make choices that are reckless, lazy, sleazy, or stupid. We have a senior ministerial team that many Conservative MPs regard as extremely incompetent, and at the same time, this inadequate cabinet is being encouraged to believe that no ministerial screw-up, however grotesque, will not be punished. This is dangerously decadent form of government. After the purging of 5 of the most senior officials since April, civil servants have clocked that Number 10's default response to anything that goes wrong is to fit up officials. They will respond accordingly. Instead of encouraging innovation, initiative and accountability within Whitehall, the professed goals of this government will endanger a culture of risk avoidance and arse covering in which officials make it their first priority to safeguard themselves against being cast as the fall guys. If ministers are no longer willing to defend their civil servants, officials will be less happy to defer to the tradition that they leave quietly when pushed out. Sir Philip Rudman, a former permanent secretary at the Home Office, is setting a precedent others can follow by suing Priti Patel for constructive dismissal. Parliament returns this week with a growing number of Conservative MPs anxious that the summer strewn of screening U-turns and howling errors is giving their government a reputation for blathering ineptitude that is draining away public support. The point of ministerial responsibility is that if an act it acts as a safety valve for discontent. The resignation of Mr. Collier and the sacking of Mr. Slater will not assuage voters across about what has happened in education for the simple reason that the betrayal of any public will have had the head of these officials. The opinion poll that was published today indicates that many voters hold the Education Secretary primarily responsible for his department's many failings, and that it is his head that is demanded and by the angry people who have been bombarding the inboxes of Tory MPs over August. The skewer on which people, the shrewder people on the Conservative benches know that power without responsibility is a poisoned method of governing, and that it will rebound on their party. A cabinet of blunderers is enough. A cabinet that refuses to take any responsibility for its mistakes invites a especially severe verdict from the public. And not be surprised that Labour, apparently if there was an election tomorrow, would absolutely wipe the floor of the Conservatives. They would be all but wiped out. And those calls, I said that there might be a backbench rebellion. Those whisperings going to get louder. And it's only a matter of time, and one of two things has got to go. And it's only a matter of time before one of them has to go, and it's probably going to be Johnson. And we've said Christmas, March, maybe April, or he somehow, as Boris has shown, somehow managed to survive right up until the next election, but at that point the Conservatives were, no, you have to go. You have to go, Boris. We're sorry, but you... they literally shove him. Those are the three times I've said he has to go. Sooner or later, we'll have to see, but I do think Boris's days are potentially numbered, and with the anger that has been thrown, especially at all those brand new Northern MPs, they're worried because they really don't want to be a one-term MP. They want to continue. And as the polling suggests, that very much looks like that what could happen to them. So I think most of this rebellion will come from them. And it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But anyway, that's that. So, thank you for watching us today. Please do like and share this video. It helps out the channel massively. And if you are new, please do subscribe to the channel. We talk about British politics and Brexit a lot. So, join us for more, incredible fun. Because, British politics at the moment, the fun never ends. Also, if you would like to support the channel another way, there are links down below to Patreon and a one-off donation link should you like to support us that way. So, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time.